Welcome to the Lead at the Top of Your Game podcast, where we equipped you to more effectively lead your seat at any employer, business, or industry in which you choose to play. Each week, we help you sharpen your leadership acumen by cracking open the playbooks of dynamic leaders who are doing big things in their professional endeavors. And now your host, leadership tactics and organizational development expert, Karen Farrell Rhodes.
Hey there, everybody. I have a question for you. Did you know that corporate investments in sustainability efforts has more than doubled as a percentage of company revenues over the past 5 years? I didn't realize that till I saw a recent research report on it. And it hit me that with this type of focus, where corporations and organizations and governments are putting their money where their mouth is, it's really important that you understand your accountability in this whole sustainability conversation. And it's also going to be crucial to really understand how you can best help lead sustainability activities in your work environment and lead them in a courageous but very impactful way. So, to help be our guide on today's show, we are fortunate to have Bridgette McAdoo, who's the VP and Global Sustainability Officer at the Genesys Corporation, which is a large tech company that helps organizations provide superior customer service through their cloud, digital, and AI offerings. Bridgette has championed corporate sustainability efforts at previous companies such as the World Wildlife Fund and Yum Brands. So I do encourage you to listen as Bridgette shares with us what corporate sustainability really is, what it's not, and why CEOs have reprioritized sustainability efforts in recent years. Also, you don't want to miss Bridgette's addition to our Leadership Execution Playbook, nor my brief segment called Karen's Take, where I share tips on how to use the insights from today's show to further sharpen your leadership acumen. And now, enjoy the episode. Well, hello, Bridgette. Thank you so much for joining the Lead at the Top of Your Game podcast. We're super excited to have you as a guest today.
I am honored, as you know. I love everything that you do with your work, so I'm excited.
Thank you. Well, one of the reasons why I had asked if you would be a guest on this podcast is because you are doing and have done for many years some fantastic work in the areas of corporate sustainability and helping to guide organizations in this area. But it's such a little known area to the layperson. I've had an opportunity to follow you and talk with you about it. But the amazing work that professionals like you will do is extremely impactful across the globe. And so I thought, wow, what a great opportunity to have an executive such as yourself come and raise the awareness of the efforts of corporate sustainability and help our listeners better understand what it is and just share why you became so passionate about it.
Right. I like to refer to sustainability as it's kind of the pulse of a corporation, right? Because it's doing work behind the scenes. It's making sure that you are staying viable and resilient, that you can, that you're thinking about everything from womb to tomb, that it's a holistic 50,000 foot view of how do you actually show up. And for me, as I always tell our teams, it's our license to operate. Because, I think at times you can feel entitled to certain things in corporate America, and you don't have to actually do some of those things. But regardless of how you show up in society, sustainability is something every single person does, whether you're corporate, nonprofit, entrepreneurship. It's how you sow back and provide opportunities into the markets where you live, work, and serve. Is where sustainability shows up. So I think, I like to think of my colleagues as those unsung heroes that's doing the work in the background. Sure. You don't need accolades. You don't need the recognition, but it's so important. I fell in love with this space about a good 10, 12 years ago.
And what are some of the areas of focus? Can we dig down just one level deeper? What are some of the areas of focus in sustainability? What did corporations really look and plan for?
Yeah, I mean, it really depends on the company. The good thing about sustainability is that the intent of the work is to look at that cross connect between people, planet, and then your economics of your company.
Mhm.
But some companies have kind of diluted it to where they're only looking at the environmental, and that's what they refer to as sustainability. Is what are we doing around climate change or waste and recycling, or water, or energy, and that's how they look at it.
Right.
And then others refer to it as CSR, where they're just only focused on their community impact, things like
Mm.
volunteerism or philanthropy and community giving. And then there's people who refer to it as ESG because the word sustainability has been so diluted that it refers to the pillars, which are the environmental work, that social work I referred to. And then there's this governance side of it, which is all things around corporate governance, anti corruption, anti bribery,
Mm.
ethics, and compliance. So, all of those things holistically, when you integrate them, that is the true essence of sustainability, is when all those things actually should be working off of each other. When you work in them in silos, you're actually not getting the full benefit out of doing the work or
Mm.
being committed to the work. But when you actually integrate them into how you do your business,
Mhm.
you will start to see win wins that you usually would not see if you looked at them separately.
No, that makes a lot of sense. And me coming from a kind of a people and organizational effectiveness perspective, I would imagine companies that have a strong sustainability approach and program are probably more likely to be employers of choice.
Right.
Yes, no? What do you
It
think?
is. I mean, I especially for this generation, you're
Mhm.
starting to see them ask about sustainability issues. They want to know if you're committed to diversity and inclusion, which is part of sustainability. They want to know what your attraction and retention. They want to know if you're committed to the climate. We're in a climate crisis.
Yes,
So
we
all
are.
of these things are starting to become like, deal breakers and table stakes for especially this new generation. It is a strong vehicle for
Mhm.
attention and of retention and attraction of employees, in my opinion.
Mhm.
I get emails all the time from employees that are just interested in our company and
Mhm.
employees that just started with our company. So excited that we actually made these commitments when it comes to sustainability because it's so important to them, right? If
Mhm.
we don't do what we need to do today, then future generations are going to suffer the consequence. And that's where sustainability shows up, is actually showing that commitment. And it's not about what it's best for the company, it's what's best for society.
No.
To me, if you're doing sustainability right, it's best for the company and best for society.
Absolutely. I can definitely see that correlation. Um, and I'm just curious, just because I don't know the breadth of executives that are in this field, unfortunately, which is why we're so happy to have you. Um, I know diversity and equity and inclusion is a piece or a pillar or focus of sustainability, but um, why should sustainability be a particular interest to, say, people of color or the underserved in our communities? Um, why should they want to know more about this?
I love that you asked that question because for me, one of the things that hurts me the most is when you look at climate issues, water issues, food deserts,
Mhm.
um, climate issues when we're talking about higher temperatures. When you look at who suffers the most,
Mhm.
any type of issue when it comes to sustainability, diversity issues, lack of access and equitable access to anything, whether it's Wi Fi, internet, education, it is
Mhm.
communities of color.
Yeah.
So we're
Mhm.
actually the ones who suffer the most from sustainability issues not being addressed. However, we are never at the table. So even if you look at this space, it's extremely whitewashed. It has been forever.
Mhm.
And what I have spent some time doing in the past few years, especially with the rise of conversations around social equity, is to just kind of move away from having just a singular conversation.
Mhm.
It's about intersectionalism. It's about climate justice. It's about environmental justice. It's about making sure that everyone has equal access to all things: clean
Mhm.
water, nutritious food, access to energy. And if you also look at, the root of a lot of the historical notions around redlining, right? When you look at the fact that a lot of those neighborhoods of color were put in areas of manufacturing areas, right? That means they don't have clean air. That means they're more susceptible for disease or health issues or high blood pressure or asthma or
Mm-hmm.
diabetes. All these things link back to inequities and lack of access or just straight out racism, right? So we
Mm-hmm.
have a extreme vested interest to want better for our communities, but I don't think we're aware enough. There's a lack of education and understanding that the people who are affected the most are the people who don't usually have a voice at the table. So it's been very personal for me
Mm-hmm.
to want to make sure that these inequities are addressed in a way that doesn't make it seem like, I often tell colleagues, especially colleagues who are not of color, Black people and brown people don't want to be saved. This is not it. We don't need white saviors.
No, no,
We
no.
need justice and equity. That's what we need, right?
Right.
And this space at time can feel that way. It can feel like, oh, well, let's go just save. It's like, no, no, no. Make sure you understand the root of the issue, and
Absolutely.
let's start there,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and then make the change happen.
Right. But I can imagine that corporations can't do it all by themselves. They've got to partner with community organizations or politicians and leaders, those that have a hand in all of these areas in the community that are the ones that are empowered to help make change. Am I wrong or
Oh,
way
no,
off
you're right.
base?
There has to be connected tissue, right?
Mm-hmm.
I can't have societal impact without actually going into my communities to make sure I'm impacting them in a way that's authentic and intentional to them, right?
Mm-hmm.
I can come up with a whole bunch of things sitting behind my four walls, but if it doesn't actually resonate with the people who I'm trying to impact, then it's going to be a false start, right?
Absolutely.
So you absolutely have to have a foot within your community. You have to make sure you're showing up in a very authentic way. You also want to partner with some strong nonprofits that can help you use your voice in a way that means something to you. So I always love signature partnerships with nonprofits who are committed to the same causes that you are. It's people who can be boots on the ground that can help you to, amplify the voice that you're trying to be heard. And it's
Right.
not about being on the front lines, meaning having your face be the one that says, oh, it's because Genesys wants to do this. It's actually because we're committed to this cause, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think that companies, you'll find them if they're really committed, they will probably have a signature partnership with a nonprofit that they've committed some great time and attention to that's helping them to further move the needle in an area that they know they can't do by themselves. None of this work we can do by ourselves. So one thing I love about sustainability,
Mm-hmm.
it's usually the area that's non-competitive. I can usually go to a competitor in my industry and say,
Mm-hmm.
let's do this together because it's in our best interest
To
and
do
it's
it
in the best
together.
interest of society.
And how rare is that you can go to,
Period. Right?
others in the industry, or like you said, even competitors, and still find a way to have some synergies.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, Bridget, one of the premises of our podcast, and we would try to provide our listeners, is like opening up the playbooks a little bit to
Mhm.
help them understand um, a lot of the good things, but also some of the challenges in you're being a leader in your particular field. So I was just curious on are there any challenges with in general with convincing the C-suite to do some of the major initiatives that sustainability executives such as yourself propose for companies? I know Genesis is very open and it's progressive
Yeah.
in its fashion, but I can imagine there are many companies that just don't embrace it quite as much as your company does.
Yeah, I'm in a very blessed situation where I have a CEO who's fully committed to sustainability and a chief strategy officer who's fully committed. Um,
Nice.
so our C-suite has completely been so supportive of me coming in as our first ever chief sustainability officer and making a strategy that we're really pushing to. But I have been in plenty of situations where that is not the case, and plenty of my colleagues. It can feel like an unnecessary fight at times, right?
Mhm.
Because there are these myths around sustainability. This myth that it only, adds more to the bottom line, and it's just going to cost more. You're just asking me to just put dollars, and I'm not getting a return. But what I always push back on, that return on that investment might not be quantifiable, but I promise you it will be qualifiable, right?
Right.
It is going to be like around protecting your brand image or just doing what we are supposed to do. There could be regulatory requirements that we need to meet, and that might be an investment. But there's also things that we just want to do because we want to differentiate ourselves or just commit to something. So I do think at times you have to, as leaders in this space, you have to do what's necessary. Make
Mhm.
sure that you're, following all regulations and laws and requirements so that your compliance in place. You have to do what's necessary around, you want to be as efficient as possible. I always tell people sustainability is actually one of the best ways you can be operationally efficient and
Mhm.
reduce your risk. If
Right.
so, if you want to talk to a CFO or a COO, start with those two things and say you can be more efficient and save money if you commit to sustainability.
Right.
That's one way of getting their play. You want to go to a legal team, not only am I reducing risk, but I'm improving our brand image. I'm keeping us in compliant, or to marketing. This improves our brand image. We don't need to market it. It markets itself if we're truly committed to it. So there's ways to actually, um, I'd like to think of sustainability as if you're doing it right, you should be able to tell one event 10 different ways, right?
Mm.
To
Mhm.
different. I've done one thing, but this is what it means to each of you. And so I always tell our teams here, it's a team sport. It doesn't happen to you, it happens because of you.
Right.
And because of you, these things are happening. So I think at times it can feel so painful when you're in this space trying to do this work because you're competing with all the different priorities that every single leader has. And you're saying, oh, well, I know it's important that you, drive revenue, but I'm also asking you to do this. And I know it's important for you to drive sales, but I'm also asking you to do this. Or they might see, why do I need to be focused on that?
Right.
Why do you need to focus on that? Or in ops, why do I need to focus on that? So you have to kind of build these business cases, and you have to try to put these nuggets in and show the proof.
Yeah.
But it's so much better when your leadership says, we're doing it because that's just what we should be doing,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah, that makes
You
a
know,
ton of sense.
we do have to prove, but we're doing it because we should be doing it. And as I've been telling our leaders, it's the power of the and. It shouldn't be a or. Like,
Mhm.
I got to do this or do that. I was like, well, what about and?
And that's right. Why can't you incorporate that into your
Yeah,
strategies that you're doing anyway? You're going through that planning rhythm anyway, right?
absolutely.
Yeah. Now that makes a lot of sense. Can you tell me, Bridget, are there a lot of sustainability executives in the world? I don't know the scope of does every major corporation have a U, or is it just a field that's now growing now that people are a little bit more conscious, socially conscious in the world?
It's a little bit behind the trend of what you're seeing happening with chief diversity officers, right?
Mm-hmm.
People kind of maybe had a director, or they kind of had somebody leading it, but then it wasn't like a CDO. And now you see all these CDOs and chief sustainability officers happen the same thing. I think, the last survey I saw, it's grown significantly over the past 3 to 5 years.
Oh,
10
fantastic.
years ago, there were very few.
Yeah.
Um, I think most major companies, especially publicly traded or Fortune 500, have a chief sustainability officer, or something such as that, like the head of ESG or the head of social impact, like whatever name they're calling it.
Mm-hmm.
There's someone there in place. I think where it does not meet the need that other C roles have is it usually, I don't find that it reports directly to the CEO as you find those other roles that are just as impactful. Maybe because it doesn't have a P&L, but I could argue so does HR doesn't have one,
That's
or
right.
others. But, and I think that's where when I see the structure of the role,
Mm-hmm.
doesn't report to the CEO. I absolutely believe it should support somewhere in the C-suite,
Yeah.
right? There shouldn't be a whole bunch of layers in between because then it becomes diluted and the ability to really be impactful becomes more hard.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. How have you thought about your career? How have you differentiated yourself as a leader in this industry?
Well, I can tell you one big difference is I'm a Black woman. So there
Oh,
ain't
there's
many
not a
of
lot of Black women in it.
we have some amazing, the ones who are there, are some
I
amazing
can
women.
imagine.
Um, that I admire that are
Mm,
in this space. But I mean, I think what the differentiation, honestly, is are the background and then just being a minority. This is a very non-diverse space, unfortunately,
yeah.
and because people just don't know what it means. It is one of those spaces you're constantly have to explain, like this is what we do, and this is why we do it, and this is why it exists.
Right.
It's not the space where you kind of know what's next. And so for me, I think I'm trying to have way more conversations around what the significance of the CSO role can be or should be to organizations. But
Hmm.
there is, I mean, I'll never get away from the minority lens on it.
Hmm.
It's a specific lens that others would not have or wouldn't understand to the degree I would, just because it's a very personal lived experience and you want to see that difference. So I think what I bring different to it is that personal lens of saying, I live and breathe this. This affects my family, my community,
Hmm.
people that I love and care about. And you want to see that change in a very intentional way, not in a way that's just kind of inauthentic and not sincere.
I love that. And even just reading up on sustainability since I've, known the work that you've done and your colleagues have done, it's just excited me as an individual, even though I have, very little in leading it. It's a fascinating field. We didn't have any, and I don't know if there are degrees where you're in school and can get a degree in corporate sustainability. But what advice do you have for anyone looking to transition into this field or industry, or some of the younger generations, next generation leaders out there that have a passion for this? I mean, how would you advise
Yeah.
them to move or transition into the field?
There are some schools who have specific programs around,
Oh,
like
they
the School of
do.
Sustainability or Environmental Science or Environmental Engineering.
Mhm.
Um, and I'm not a core, that wasn't my background. I'm an engineer, but I didn't
Mhm.
study environmental engineering. And that wasn't something that was even offered when I got mine, back then. But nonetheless, now there are programs, there are schools who have these sustainability institutes, and there are universities that have fantastic programs. I do think they're missing some core things that we need in corporate sustainability. They focus very much on the environmental science and but I don't know if they're actually teaching it from that holistic kind of that ESG approach, more on the E side, which is still significant. Don't get me wrong.
Mhm.
Um, Climate crisis, and I think these programs are fantastic. The advice I would give, and even like the intern that I have, is you know dig deep within your program, ask those questions, like use that internship experience to say, here's what's actually happening on the corporate side. We need a
Mhm.
class in this, or we need a class in that. This isn't being offered, but it's expected once you actually graduate.
Mhm.
School is still theoretical, right?
Mhm.
And then you get into the real world and you actually need to apply something. And
Mhm.
so I would tell any one that's studying this, if they actually do want to go deep into sustainability, look for universities who do have these programs in either environmental engineering or environmental science, or you might actually want to do something that's very specific into like animal science or food science, like explore those things.
Mhm.
And then look into programs. There are minority programs like Manners that
Oh.
has great programs devoted to minority students studying any type of environmental or animal or food science. There's programs like NESB where you
Mhm.
can go in, and even in they have environmental engineering tracks there, or even programs like, the MBA, Black MBA, Hispanic MBA, and the Shimba, all of them are starting to recognize this kind of lens. So there might be a vertical around diversity. There might be a vertical around corporate governance. So, just expand your learning capability and capacity to look in those those abnormal lanes of growth.
No, that makes a lot of sense. And there's a lot of resources, and we'll put some of the links to some of those suggested things in our show notes. So thank you for sharing those. So I wouldn't be a leadership podcast without talking a little bit more about your journey as a leader over the years. And I was just curious, what is one thing that has occurred during your career, positive or negative, that you didn't expect?
Oh, well, I think it when you get to the point I feel like, especially for some executives and maybe executives of color, we all at times, at least when I talk to my friends and colleagues, there comes this moment when you have this kind of this you have to make a decision if you're going to follow your path that aligns with your values. And for me, it was a decision where I could either sit still and do what I was doing, even though I knew it didn't align with my personal values, or I could pivot and do what was going to keep my soul at peace.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it takes an amount of courage, and it also takes an amount of being willing to a resolve of what the consequences of that decision.
Mm-hmm.
And that's never easy because there's no guarantees in that.
Right.
You're betting on yourself and just saying, I'm going to have to do this regardless, especially when you're so used to taking care of everyone around you.
Mm-hmm.
But I think for me, having to put my soul at peace, I had to ensure that my personal and professional values were all aligned,
Mm-hmm.
and making decisions for my career based off that was hard but necessary.
Mm-hmm.
In the moment, before the moment, I think there was fear.
Mm-hmm.
After the moment, there was so much relief,
Mm-hmm.
because who wants to sit in the car and cry before going to work,
Oh
right?
my goodness.
You know, I don't want to go
My
inside,
goodness. Yes.
because you knew that everything about that experience looked good from the outside. You get to travel the world, you're paid well, you have all these moments, but then you realize this is not a healthy situation.
Very.
And I do think at times we sit in that unhealthiness because out of necessity.
Mm-hmm.
But you'll never actually get to what you're supposed to get, those blessings are, if you sit in that space, right? You have to be willing to move. And it's never easy, but it's necessary.
You're so right. And the story that you just described, as you know, I wrote a book about some of the successful leadership tactics of some of the world's most successful leaders. And that is a perfect example of courageous agility, which is doing the right thing that aligns with your beliefs and values, even if the future or what the next steps are unclear. And
Yes.
to your point, sometimes you're going to have to take a stand in order to be at peace with what you're doing, when you know internally and in your heart and that it's the right thing to do, right? When you're trying to take care of people.
And I think, out of all of your 7 principles, I'm not saying that they're all easy by any means, right? These are all steps you have to take, right? Whether it's,
no matter what,
building that intellectual horsepower, the executive presence, that's something I have been intentional about, is that shadow of leadership, making sure that people can talk about you when you leave in a way that's just as positive, and that they can advocate and sponsor for you, and understanding all the stakeholders. You can read the room well. These are all things I think you build the capacity and capability for through your career, if you're paying attention, if you're being honest with yourself, and if you're being open. But that courageous one, man, I tell you, it has created some tears, some angst, and some high blood pressure.
Oh no, we can't have the high blood pressure.
But I have no regret.
Yeah.
And I taking the big one now. Any other consequence or courageous discussion I need to have,
Hmm.
I'm more resolved with it because I'm so willing to sit in the consequence.
No, that makes, and that's a big shift in mindset too, to come to being comfortable in that space. Not
Mm.
everyone can be, which is a great segue to my next question. Being a leader is tough. I mean, people love the title or the level, but it's very tough to be a high performing leader, especially in today's world. And I always joke that, our leaders today almost have to be athletes, to take care of their mind, body, and soul, to have the energy and the brain power and the to be able to sustain that high level of performance at all time. I'm just curious, how, as a leader, do you take care of yourself? How do you make sure that um, that you're able to function on all cylinders when you need to? What are some of
A
those things
lot of
that you
wine.
do?
I'm just playing.
Huh?
I was saying, I said a lot of wine. I said, no, I'm just um,
I love a glass of wine myself, so.
no, actually, what is for the past year, my husband and I have made like a recommitment to fitness, and it has been a game changer. So
Mhm.
I've been so focused. I mean, the pandemic, the blessing in it for us was, the fact that we just had no excuse not to recommit to fitness.
Mhm.
And so working out, and almost every day, and then if on the days I don't work out, to do yoga and meditate. It
Mhm.
has been freeing, and it's put both of us in a different space, right? You just make that. But we've also, especially in the pandemic, is making time for each other. It's easy to kind of get into these, because we're now both working from home. I'm upstairs, he's downstairs, and we truly make sure we eat dinner together. And I want to go walk, take my dog for a walk so that,
Mhm.
I can just get some air. And there's things I'm trying to be way more intentional about.
Yeah.
um, that I took for granted prior to the pandemic because, life was moving so fast.
Yeah.
But I think it helps me to show up better for my team,
Yeah.
because I have outlets of release.
No, I love that you shared that. And similar to you, I've done the same thing because I was, as you know, on the road all the time, traveling across the globe. And with the pandemic, it was forced to spend more quality time in more thoughtful ways,
Mm-hmm.
both with myself and with my family and friends. So you're absolutely right. That's one of the, I'd say, the positives that came out of the pandemic,
Yeah,
definitely.
yeah.
All right, well, we have just a few more minutes, and so I want to close by um, asking you a few fun questions. We call this round full disclosure,
Uh-oh.
and, but they're fun questions to help our listeners know just a little bit more about you. So, my first question for you is do you have a favorite sport or sports team?
Ha. Well, I'm a Georgia peach at the core. So I still ride for my Falcons.
Yay, yay.
Um, But I grew up being a football girl because my brother played football. I love sports, but I now have just kind of had this affinity towards tennis.
Oh,
Um, and more probably because of Serena and Naomi and Sloane, but
mhm.
I just love watching it. So
Awesome.
uh, I'll probably say the new sport is tennis, but I am still a Falcons
Gotcha. Wonderful. What is a movie or book that you would recommend and why?
fan. Depends on to who.
All right. I can imagine, right?
Um, One of my favorite books
Mhm.
is Coldest Winter Ever. And I wouldn't recommend it to someone that's not an adult, but there's that book. I mean, I remember reading it and I was like, I can't wait to see this as a movie. Like I could just imagine it kind of coming to to screen.
Yeah.
Um, I One of the books that we've read recently as a couple was Atomic Habits.
Hmm.
And it was something we really both enjoyed, of just kind of looking at, some of the habits we had and how we can be more productive and be more mindful and intentional. I remember
Yeah.
having a professor in grad school who was like, multitasking is inefficient. I was like, you a lie. And so
I
I
know.
was like, no, no. But he also taught mindfulness and he taught meditation. So I was like, oh, multitasking is everything. But then
Yeah.
as you start realizing, like, I'm really inefficient when I'm not focused.
Oh, that's funny. That's precious. What is one thing about you that sometimes people misunderstand about you?
Oh, where do I start? So here I remember, I always tell people this. I had a boss tell me at the beginning of my career. She said to me, she said, "You have three things working against you."
Mm.
And she said, "You're black, you're beautiful, and you have brains." And she's like, "Don't become a bitch about it, and don't let it be your burden." Like, I always say the 5 B's.
Mm-hmm.
And I I think for the first part of my career, it was a burden because, I felt like I had to kind of make sure people felt like I was a softer version of me
Mm-hmm.
all times. Like,
Mm-hmm.
because no matter how I showed up and said nothing, I was intimidating. And
Mm-hmm.
I suffered from what a lot of Black women have suffered from throughout their careers, sitting for your feedback, thinking you've done it. And they're like, "You're so amazing," but people just have a hard time. I'm like, I can't change who I am. And
Right.
it wasn't until later in my career that I was just fine with saying, either you accept me as I am, or, like, am I intimidated or are you intimidated?
Right. 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 Right.
Those
And
are
that's a
two
big
different.
difference.
And so I'm now willing to ask and push back on those questions when they're like, "Oh, so people just feel like you're," I'm like, if you know me, I'm like the easiest person to talk to. And I'm damn near hilarious. So I don't know what your problem is. But you people, I think at times, being a tall, dark skinned Black woman with
Mhm.
natural hair, I'm supposed to be this, head twisting, finger snapping,
Yeah.
um, ready to go off. And when I speak, it's, "Oh, don't be angry." And it's just like, I am
An
not
angry
a
Black woman, huh?
Black woman. I am not emotional.
Right.
Uh, and I think it will take still a minute for us to be seen for who we are,
Mm. Yeah.
right? Brilliant,
Yeah.
successful, impactful, um, caring, dependent, like that's who we are.
That's
That's
right.
who we there, and I dare to even say strong because it gets misused, right? We can't
So
even be
much.
strong because it doesn't allow us to be vulnerable.
Yeah.
You know?
Absolutely.
So it's just, I think that misconception, unfortunately, like so many,
Mm.
I've had to fight.
That makes a lot of sense. Well, let's end with one last question on a positive note. And what is one piece of advice that you would love, or a statement or encouragement that you would love to leave with our listeners?
Our family quote, my brother and I, is "Adversity introduces man into himself."
Mm.
And it's
Love that.
a derivative of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., of his quote. But what I love always about it is it's just, it will test you, but it will break you. And I always like to say that this is just my test to be my testimony, but I
Mm-hmm.
won't be broken by it.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I just try to focus on, if you can, what's on the other side of that moment, if you can. If you can't, um, I always now, especially with my team, I'm like, use your words, right?
Yeah.
People can help you if you don't say something.
That's right. That's right.
And internalizing it, only it's going to harm you in the long run.
It's not gonna help
Find
you.
some place or some space to let it out.
Love that. Love, love, love that. Well, on that note, I just want to say thank you so much for joining the Lead at the Top of Your Game podcast. I know I've got a ton of nuggets out of this, and I know the listeners will as well. So thank you once again, and we hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you.
All right. Bye.
I hope you enjoyed our conversation with Bridgette McAdoo, corporate sustainability expert and VP and Global Sustainability Officer at the Genesys Corporation. Links to her bio, her entry into our leadership playbook, and additional resources on corporate sustainability can be found in the show notes, both on your favorite podcast platform of choice and at leadyourgamepodcast.com. Now for my segment called Karen's Take, where I share tips on how to use some of today's insights to sharpen your leadership acumen. I bet if I asked 100 employees what was their employer's top 3 corporate sustainability goals, 90 of those 100 probably couldn't do it. So my first piece of advice to everyone is to see if your employer has a sustainability plan and take the time to read it. This one act alone will differentiate you from 99% of your peers. And if you're wondering where to find the document is likely on your company's website or is housed somewhere on your company's intranet. So next, once you read your company's sustainability plan, take the time to brainstorm a couple of recommendations that you would love to see added to the plan yourself, and then seek to share them with both your direct manager and your skip level boss or manager. This will require you to lead both with courageous agility and stakeholder savvy, as you muster that courage to stand up for what you believe and communicate it in an effective way to your work colleagues. Remember that whether your managers accept your suggestion is not the real win. The real win is the increased visibility and deepened relationships with key stakeholders in your work environment. Those who have that power and influence to help you grow your career or business, that they sit up and take note. And you never know what opportunities may come out of the experience. Good luck to you. And that's our show for today. Thank you for listening to the Lead at the Top of Your Game podcast, where we help you lead your seat at any employer, business, or industry in which you choose to play. You can check out the show notes, additional episodes, bonus resources, and also submit guest recommendations on our website at leadyourgamepodcast.com. You can follow me on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn by searching for the name Karen Rhodes, with Karen being spelled Karan. And if you like the show, the greatest gift you can give would be to subscribe and leave a rating on your podcast platform of choice. This podcast has been a production of Shockingly Different Leadership, a global consultancy which helps organizations execute their people, talent development, and organizational effectiveness initiatives on an on-demand project or contract basis. Huge thanks to our production and editing team for a job well done. Goodbye for now.